the 80th anniversary of the publication of the encyclical Rerum Novarum, the message of which continues to inspire action for social justice, prompt us to take up again and to extend the teaching of our predecessors in response to the new needs of a changing world. The Church, in fact, travels forward with humanity and shares its lot in the setting of history. At the same time that she announces to men the good news of God's love and of salvation in Christ, she qualifies their activity in the light of the gospel, and in this way help them to correspond to God's plan of love and to realize the fullness of their aspirations. Universal appeal. It is with confidence that we see the Spirit of the Lord pursuing His work in the hearts of men, and in every place gathering together Christian community conscious of their responsibilities in society. On all of the continents, among all races, nations, and cultures, and under all conditions, the Lord continues to raise up authentic apostles of the gospel. We have had the opportunity to meet these people, to admire them, and to give them our encouragement in the course of our recent journeys. We have gone into the crowds and have heard the appeals, cries of distress, and at the same time cries of hope. Under these circumstances, we have seen in a new perspective the grave problems of our time. These problems, of course, are particularly to each part of the world, but at the same time they are common to all mankind, which is questioning itself about its future and about the tendency and the meaning of the changes taking place. Flagrant inequalities exist in the economic, cultural, and political development of the nation. While some regions are heavily industrialized, others are still at the agricultural stage. While some countries enjoy prosperity, others are struggling against starvation. While some people have a high standard of culture, others are still engaged in eliminating illiteracy. From all sides, there there rises a yearning for more justice and a desire for a better, guaranteed peace in mutual respect among individuals and people. In the face of such widely varying situation, it is difficult for us to utter a unified message and to put forward a solution which has universal validity. Such is not our ambition, nor it is our mission. It is up to the Christian community to analyze the objectivity of the situation, which is proper to their own country, to shed on it the light of the gospel in terrible words, and to draw principle of reflection, norms of judgment, and directive for action from the social teaching of the Church. This social teaching has been worked out in the course of history and notably in this industrial era. Since the historic date of the message of Pope Leo XIII on the condition of the workers, and it is an honor and joy for us to celebrate today the anniversary of that message. It is up to these Christian communities, with the help of the Holy Spirit, in communion with the bishop who hold responsibility and in dialogue with other Christian brethren and all men of goodwill, to discern the options and commitments which are called for in order to bring about the social, political, and economic changes seen in many cases to be urgently needed. In this search for the changes which should be promoted, Christians must first of all renew their confidence, the forcefulness and special character of the demands made by the gospel. The gospel is not out of date because was proclaimed, written, and lived in a different socio-cultural context. Its inspiration, enriched by the living experience of Christian tradition over the centuries, remains ever new for converting men and for advancing the life of society. It is not, however, to be utilized for the profit of the particular temporal options, to the neglect of its universal and eternal message. Diversity of situations. There is of course a wide diversity among the situations in which Christians willingly or unwillingly find themselves according to regions, socio-political system and cultures. In some places they are reduced to silence, regarded with suspicion, and as it were kept on the fringe of society, enclosed without freedom in a totalitarian system. In other places they are a weak minority whose voice makes itself heard with difficulty. In some other nations where the Church sees her place recognized, sometimes officially so, she too finds herself subjected to the repercussions of a crisis, which is unsettling society. Some of her members are tempted by radical and a violent solution from which they believe that they can expect a happier outcome, while some people, unaware of present injustice, strive to prolong the existing situations. Others allow themselves to be beguiled by revolutionary ideologies which promise them, not without delusion, a definitely better world. Specific message of the Church. Amid the disturbance and uncertainties of the present hour, the Church has a specific message to proclaim and a support to give to men in their efforts to take in hand and give direction to their future. Since the period in which the encyclical Rerum Novarum denounced in a forceful and imperative manner the scandal of the condition of the workers in the nascent industrial society, historical evolution has led to an awareness of other dimension and other application of social justice. The encyclical Quadragesimo Anno and Mater et Magistra already noted this fact. The recent council for its part took care to point them out, in particular in the pastoral constitution Gaudium et Spes. We ourselves have already continued this line of thought in our encyclical Popularum Progresso. Today, we said the principal fact that we all must all recognize is that the social question has become worldwide. A renewed consciousness of the demands of the gospel makes it the Church's duty to put herself at the service of all, to help them grasp their serious problem in all its dimensions, and to convince them that solidarity in action at this turning point in human history is matter of urgency.
It will moreover be for the forthcoming synod of Bishop itself to study more closely and to examine in greater detail the Church's mission in the face of grave issues raised today by the question of justice in the world. But the anniversary of Rerum Novarum, Venerable Brother, give us the opportunity today to confide our preoccupations and thoughts in the face of this problem to you as the President of the Pontifical Commission, Justice, and Peace and of the Council of Laity. In this way, it is also our wish to offer these bodies of the Holy See our encouragement in their ecclesial activity in service of men. So doing, our purpose, without however forgetting the permanent problems already dealt with by our predecessor, is to draw attention to a number of questions. These are questions which, because of the urgency, extent, and complexity, must, in the years to come, take place among the preoccupations of Christians, so that with other men, the latter may dedicate themselves to solving the new difficulties which put the very future of man in jeopardy. It is necessary to situate the problem created by the modern economy in the wider context of a new civilization. These problems include human conditions of production, fairness in the exchange of goods, and in the division of wealth, the significance of the increased needs of consumption, and the sharing of responsibility. In the present changes, which are so profound and so rapid, Each day, man discovers himself anew, and he questions himself about the meaning of his own being and of his collective survival. Reluctant to gather the lessons of a past that he considers over and done, with and too different from the present, man, nevertheless, needs to have light shed upon his future, a future which he perceives to be as uncertain as it is changing, by permanent eternal truth. These are truths which are certainly greater than man, but, if he so wills, he can himself find their traces. A major phenomenon draws our attention, as much in the industrialized countries as in those which are developing: urbanization. After long centuries, agrarian civilization is weakening, with sufficient attention being devoted to the arrangement and improvement of the life of the country people, whose inferior and at times miserable economic situation provokes the flight to the unhappy crowded conditions of the city outskirts, where neither employment nor housing awaits them. This unceasing flight from the land, industrial growth, continual demographic expansion, and the attraction of urban center brings about contraceptions of people, the extent of which difficult to imagine. For people are already speaking in terms of megalopolis, grouping together tens of millions of persons. Of course, there exist medium-sized towns, the dimension of which ensure a better balance in the population, while being able to offer employment to those that in progress in agriculture makes available. They permit an adjustment of the human environment which better avoids the proletarianism and crowding of the great built-up areas. The inordinate growth of these centers accompanies industrial expansion without being identified with it. Based on technological research and the transformation of nature, industrialization constantly goes forward, giving proof of incessant creativity, while certain enterprises develop and are concentrated. Others die or change their location. Thus, new social problems are created. Professional or regional unemployment, redeployment, and mobility of persons, permanent adaptations of workers, and disparity of conditions in the different branches of industry. Unlimited competition, utilizing the modern means of publicity incessantly launches the new products and tries to attract the customer. While earlier industrial installations which are still capable of functioning become useless, while very large areas of the populations are unable to satisfy their primary needs, superfluous needs are ingeniously created. It can thus rightly be asked if, in spite of all his conquest, man is not turning back against himself, the results of his great activity. Having rationally endeavored to control nature, is he not now becoming the slave of the objects which he makes? Christians in the city is not the rise of an urban civilization which accompanies the advance of industrial civilization, a true challenge to the wisdom of man, to his capacity for organization, to his far-seeing imagination. Within industrial society, urbanization sets both the ways of life and the habitual structures of existence, the family, the neighborhood, and the very framework of the Christian community. Man is experiencing a new loneliness. It is not in the face of a hostile nature which it has taken him centuries to subdue, but in an anonymous crowd which surrounds him and in which he feels himself a stranger. Urbanization, undoubtedly, an irreversible stage in the development of human societies, confronts man with difficult problems. How is he to to master its growth, regulate its organization, and successfully accomplish its animation for the good of all. In this disordered growth, new proletarianists are born. They install themselves in the heart of the cities, sometimes abandoned by the rich. They dwell on the outskirts, which become a belt of misery, besaining in a still silent protest the luxury which valiantly cries out from centers of consumption and waste. Instead of favoring fraternal encounter and mutual aid, the city fosters discrimination and also indifference. It lends itself to new forms of exploitation and of domination, whereby some people, in speculating on the needs of others, derive inadmissible profits. Behind the facades, much misery is hidden, unsuspected by the closest neighbors. Other forms of misery spread where human dignity founders. Delinquency, criminality, abuse of drugs, and eroticism.
11. It is in fact the weakest who are the victims of dehumanizing living conditions, degrading for conscience and harmful for the family institution. The promiscuity of working people's housing makes a minimum of intimacy impossible. Young couples waiting in vain for a decent dwelling at a price they can afford are demoralized, and their union can thereby even be endangered. Youth escape from a home which is too confined and seek in the streets compensations and companionships which cannot be supervised. It is the grave duty of those responsible to strive to control this process and to give it direction. Number 12. To build up the city, the place where men and their expanded communities exist, to create new modes of neighborliness and relationships, to perceive an original application of social justice, and to undertake responsibility for this collective future, which is foreseen as difficult, is a task in which Christians must share. To those who are heaped up in an urban promiscuity, which becomes intolerable, it is necessary to bring a message of hope. This can be done by brotherhood, which is lived, and by concrete justice. Let Christians, conscious of this new responsibility, not lose heart in view of the vast and faceless society. Let them recall Jonah, who traversed Nineveh, the great city, to proclaim therein the good news of God's mercy, and was upheld in his weakness by the sole strength of the word of Almighty God. In the Bible, the city is in fact often the place of sin and pride, the pride of man, who feels secure enough to be able to build his life without God and even to affirm that he is powerful against God. But there is also the example of Jerusalem, the holy city, the place where God is encountered, the promise of the city which comes from high. Youth, number 13. Urban life and industrial change bring strongly to light questions which until now were poorly grasped. What place, for example, in this world being brought to birth should be given to youth? Everywhere dialogue is proving to be difficult between youth, with its aspirations, renewal, and also insecurity for the future, and the adult generations. It is obvious to all that here we have a source of serious conflicts, division and opting out, even within the family, and a question of modes of authority, education for freedom, and the handing on of values and beliefs, which strikes at the deep roots of society. Workers, number 14. As the Church solemnly reaffirmed in the recent Council, the beginning, the subject, and the goal of all social institutions is and must be the human person. Every man has the right to work, to a chance to develop his qualities and his personality in the exercise of his profession, to equitable remuneration which would enable him and his family to lead a worthy life on the material, social, and cultural and spiritual level, and 2. Assistance in case of need arising from sickness or age. Workers, number 14. As the Church solemnly reaffirmed in the recent Council, the beginning, the subject, and the goal of all social institutions is and must be the human person. Every man has the right to work, to a chance to develop his qualities and his personality in the exercise of his profession, to equitable remuneration which would enable him and his family to lead a worthy life on the material, social, and cultural and spiritual level, and 2. Assistance in case of need arising from sickness or age. The role of women. Similarly, in many countries, a charter for women which would put an end to actual discrimination and would establish relationships of equality in rights and of respect for their dignity is the object of study and at times of lively demands. We do not have in mind that false equality which would deny the distinction with woman's proper role, which is of such capital importance at the heart of the family as well as within society. Developments in legislation should, on the contrary, be directed to protecting her proper vocation and at the same time recognizing her independence as a person and her equal rights to participate in cultural, economic, and social and political life. The right to which as a final means of defense remains certainly recognized, conditions which are too burdensome for the overall economy and for the social body, or to desire to obtain in this way demands of a directly political nature. When it is a question of public service required for the life of an entire nation, it is necessary to be able to assess the limit beyond which the harm caused to society becomes inadmissible. Victims of change. Number 15. In short, progress has already been made in introducing in the area of human relationships greater justice and greater sharing of responsibilities. But in this immense field much remains to be done. Further reflection, research, and experimentation must be actively pursued, unless one is to be late in meeting the legitimate aspirations of the workers, aspirations which are being increasingly asserted according as their education, their consciousness of their dignity, and the strength of their organization increase. Egoism and domination are permanent temptations for men. Likewise, an ever finer discernment is needed in order to strike at the roots of newly arising situations of injustice and to establish progressively a justice which will be less and less imperfect. In industrial change, which demands speedy and constant adaptation, those who will find themselves injured will be more numerous at a greater disadvantage from the point of view of making their voices heard. The Church directs her attention to those new poor, the handicapped and the maladjusted, the old, different groups of those on the fringe of society, and so on, in order to recognize them, help them, defend their place and dignity in a society hardened by competition and the attraction of success. Although for the defense of these rights democratic societies accept today the principle of labor union rights, they are not always open to their exercise. The important role of union organizations must be admitted. Their object is the representation of various categories of workers, their lawful collaboration in the economic advance of society, and the development of the sense of their responsibility for the realization of the common good. Their activity, however, is not without its difficulties. Here and the temptation can arise of profiting from a position of force to impose, particularly by strikes,
discrimination. Among the victims of situations of injustice, unfortunately, no new phenomenon must be placed those who are discriminated against in law or in fact on account of their race, origin, color, culture, sex, or religion. Racial discrimination possesses at the moment a character of very great relevance by reason of the tension which it stirs up both within countries and on the international level. Men rightly consider unjustifiable and reject as inadmissible the tendency to maintain or introduce legislation or behavior systematically inspired by racialist prejudice. The members of mankind share the same basic rights and duties, as well as the same supernatural destiny. Within a country which belongs to each one, all should be equal before the law, find equal admittance to economic, cultural, civic, and social life, and benefit from a fair sharing of the nation's riches. Right to emigrate. We are thinking of the precarious situation of a great number of emigrant workers whose condition as foreigners makes it all the more difficult for them to make any sort of social vindication in spite of their real participation in the economic effort of the country that receives them. It is urgently necessary for people to go beyond a narrowly nationalist attitude in their regard and to give them a charter which will assure them a right to emigrate, favor their integration, facilitate their professional advancement, and give them the access to decent housing where, if such is the case, their families can join them. Linked to this category are the people who, to find work or to escape a disaster or a hostile climate, leave their regions and find themselves without roots among other people. It is everyone's duty, but especially that of Christians, to work with energy for the establishment of universal brotherhood, the indispensable basis for authentic justice and the condition for enduring peace. We cannot in truthfulness call upon that God who is the Father of all if we refuse to act in a brotherly way toward certain men created to God's image. A man's relationship with God the Father and his relationship with his brother men are so linked together that the scripture says, "He who does not love does not know God." Creating employment. With demographic growth, which is particularly pronounced in the young nations, the number of those failing to find work and driven to misery or parasitism will grow in the coming years unless the conscience of man rouses itself and gives rise to a general movement of solidarity through an effective policy of investment and of organization of production and trade, as well as of education. We know the attention given to these problems within international organizations, and it is our lively wish that their members will not delay bringing their actions into line with their declarations. It is disquieting in this regard to note a kind of fatalism which is gaining a hold even on people in positions of responsibility. These feelings sometimes lead to maltuition solutions inculcated by active propaganda for contraception and abortion. In this critical situation, it must, on the contrary, be affirmed that the family, without which no society can stand, has a right to the assistance which will assure of it of the conditions for a healthy development. It is certain, we said in our encyclical Populorum Progressio, that public authorities can intervene within the limit of their competence by favoring the availability of the appropriate information and by adopting suitable measures, provided that this be in conformity with the moral law and that they respect the rightful freedom of married couples. Where the inalienable right to marriage and procreation is lacking, human dignity has ceased to exist. In no other age has the appeal to the imagination of society been so explicit. To this should be devoted enterprises of invention and capital as important as those who invested for armaments or technological achievements. If man lets himself rush ahead without foreseeing in good time the emergence of new social problems, they will become too grave for a peaceful solution to be hoped for.
Media of social communication. Among the major changes of our times, we do not wish to forget to emphasize the growing role being assumed by the media of social communication and their influence on the transformation of mentalities of knowledge, of organizations, and of society itself. Certainly, they have many positive aspects. Thanks to them, news from the entire world reaches us practically in an instant, establishing contacts which supersede distances and creating elements of unity among all men. A greater spread of education and culture is becoming possible. Nevertheless, by their very action, the media of social communication are reaching the point of representing as it were a new power. One cannot but ask about those who really hold this power, the aims that they pursue, and the means they use, and finally, about the effect of their activity on the exercise of individual liberty, both in the political and ideological spheres and in social, economic, and cultural life. The men who hold this power have a grave moral responsibility with respect to the truth of the information that they spread, the needs and the reactions that they generate, and the values which they put forward. In the case of television, moreover, what is coming into being is an original mode of knowledge and a new civilization, that of the image. Naturally, the public authorities cannot ignore the growing power and influence of the media of social communication and the advantages and risks which their use involves for the civic community and for its development and real perfecting. Consequently, they are called upon to perform their own positive function for the common good by encouraging every constructive expression, by supporting individual citizens and groups in defending the fundamental values of the persons and of human society, and also by taking suitable steps to prevent the spread of what would harm the common heritage of values on which orderly civil progress is based. The environment. While the horizon of man is thus being modified according to the images that are chosen for him, another transformation is making itself felt, one which is dramatic and unexpected consequence of human activity. Man is suddenly becoming aware that by an ill-considered exploitation of nature he risks destroying it and becoming in his turn the victim of this degradation. Not only is the material environment becoming a permanent menace, pollution and refuse, new illness and absolute destructive capacity, but the human framework is no longer under man's control, thus creating an environment for tomorrow which may well be intolerable. This is a wide-ranging social problem which concerns the entire human family. The Christian must turn to these new perceptions in order to take on responsibility, together with the rest of men, for a destiny which from now on is shared by all. Fundamental aspirations and currents of ideas. While scientific and technological progress continues to overturn man's surroundings, his pattern of knowledge, work, consumption, and relationships, two aspirations persistently make themselves felt in this new context, and they grow stronger to the extent that he becomes better informed and better educated. The aspiration to equality and the aspiration to participation, two forms of man's dignity and freedom. Advantages and limitations of judicial recognition. Through the statement of the rights of man and the seeking for international agreements for the application of these rights, progress has been made towards inscribing these two aspirations in deeds and structures. Nevertheless, various forms of discrimination continually reappear: ethnic, cultural, religious, political, and so on. In fact, human rights are still too often disregarded, if not scoffed at, or else they receive only formal recognition. In many cases, legislation does not keep up with real situations. Legislation is necessary, but it is not sufficient for setting up true relationship of justice and equity. In teaching us charity, the gospel instructs us in the preferential respect due to the poor and the special situation they have in society. The more fortunate should renounce some of their rights so as to place their goods more generously at the service of others. If beyond legal rules, there is really no deeper feeling of respect for and service to others, then even equality before the law can serve as an alibi for flagrant discrimination, continued exploitation, and actual contempt. Without a renewed education in solidarity, an overemphasis of equality can give rise to an individualism in which one claims his own rights without wishing to be answerable for the common good. In this field, everyone sees the highly important contribution of the Christian spirit, which moreover answers man's yearning to be loved. Love for man, the prime value of the earthly order, ensures the condition for peace, both social peace and international peace, by affirming our universal brotherhood.
The political society. The two aspirations to equality and to participation seek to promote a democratic type of society. Various models are proposed. Some are tried out. None of them gives complete satisfaction, and the search goes on between ideological and pragmatic tendencies. The Christian has the duty to take part in this search and in the organization and life of political society. As a social being, man builds his destiny within a series of particular groupings which demand, as their completion and as a necessary condition for their development, a vaster society, one of a universal character, the political society. All particular activity must be placed within that wider society, and thereby it takes on the dimension of the common good. This indicates the importance of education for life in society, in which there are called to mind not only information on each one's rights, but also their necessary correlative, the recognition of the duties of each one in regard to others. The sense and practice of duty are themselves conditioned by self-mastery and by the acceptance of responsibility and of the limits placed upon the freedom of the individual or of the group. 25. Political activity. Need one remark that we are dealing primarily with an activity, not an ideology, should be the projection of a plan of society which is consistent in its concrete means and in its inspiration, and which springs from a complete conception of man's vocation and of its differing social expressions. It is not for the state or even for political parties, which would be closed unto themselves, to try to impose an ideology by means that would lead to a dictatorship over minds, the worst kind of all. It is for cultural and religious groupings, in the freedom of acceptance which they presume, to develop in the social body, disinterestedly and in their own ways, those ultimate convictions on the nature, origin, and end of man and society. In this field, it is well to keep in mind the principle proclaimed at the Second Vatican Council. The truth cannot impose itself except by virtue of its own truth, and it makes its entrance into the mind at once, quietly and with power. Ideologies and human liberty. Therefore, the Christian who wishes to live his faith in a political activity which he thinks of as service cannot, without contradicting himself, adhere to ideological systems which radically or substantially go against his faith and his concept of man. He cannot adhere to the Marxist ideology, to its atheistic materialism, to its dialectic of violence, and to the way it absorbs individual freedom in the collectivity, at the same time denying all transcendence to man and his personal and collective history. Nor can he adhere to the liberal ideology, which believes it exalts individual freedom by withdrawing it from every limitation, by stimulating it through exclusive seeking of interest and power, and by considering social solidarities as more or less as automatic consequences of individual initiatives, not as an aim and a major criterion of the value of the social organization. 27. is their need to stress the possible ambiguity of every social ideology. Sometimes it leads political or social activity to be simply the application of an abstract, purely theoretical idea. At other times, it is thought which becomes a mere instrument at the service of activity as a simple means of a strategy. In both cases, it is not man that risks finding himself alienated. The Christian faith is above and is sometimes opposed to the ideologies in that it recognizes God, who is transcendent and the creator, and who, through all the levels of creation, calls on man as endowed with responsibility and freedom. 28. There would also be the danger of giving adherence to an ideology which does not rest on a true and organic doctrine, to take refuge in it as a final and sufficient explanation of everything, and thus to build a new idol, accepting, at times without being aware of doing so, its totalitarian and coercive character, and people imagine they find it in a justification for their activity, even violent activity, and an adequate response to a generous desire to serve. The desire remains, but it allows itself to be consumed by an ideology which, even if it suggests certain paths to man's liberation, ends up by making him a slave.
Historical evolution of Marxism. Number 32. Other Christians even asked whether an historical development of Marxism might not authorize certain concrete rapprochements. They note in fact a certain splintering of Marxism which until now showed itself to be a unitary ideology which explained in atheistic terms the whole man and the world, since it did not go outside their development process. Apart from the ideological confrontation officially separating the various champions of Marxism-Leninism in their individual interpretations of the thought of its founder, and apart from the open oppositions between the political system which make use of its name today, some people lay down distinctions between Marxism's various levels of expressions. 29. It has been possible today to speak of a retreat of ideologies. In this respect, the present time may be favorable for an openness to the concrete transcendence of Christianity. It may also be a more accentuated sliding towards a new positivism, universalized technology as the dominant form of activity, as the overwhelming pattern of existence, even as a language, without the question of its meaning being really asked. Historical movements. Number 30. But outside of this positivism which reduces man to a single dimension, even if it be an important one today, and by so doing mutilates him, the Christian encounters in his activity concrete historical movements sprung from ideologies and in part distinct from them. Our venerated predecessor, Pope John XIII and Pacem in Terris, already showed that it is possible to make a distinction. Neither can false philosophical teachings regarding the nature, origin, and destiny of the universe and of man can be identified with historical movements that have economic, social, cultural, or political ends, not even when these movements have originated from those teachings and have drawn and still drawn inspiration therefrom. Because of the teachings, once they are drawn up and defined, remain always the same, while the movements, being concerned with historical situations in constant revolution, cannot be influenced by this latter and cannot avoid, therefore, being subject to the changes even of profound nature. Besides, who can deny that those movements, in so far as they conform to dictates of right reason and are interpreters of the lawful aspirations of human person, contain elements and that are positive and deserving of approval? Attraction of socialist currents. Number 31. Some Christians are today attracted by socialist currents and their various developments. They try to recognize therein a certain number of aspirations which they carry within themselves in the name of their faith. They feel that they are part of that historical current and wish to play a part within it. Now, this historical current takes on, under the same name, different forms according to different continents and cultures, even if it drew its inspiration, and still does in many cases, from ideologies incompatible with faith. Careful judgment is called for. Too often, Christians attracted by socialism tend to idealize it in terms which, apart from anything else, are very general: a will for justice, solidarity, and equality. They refuse to recognize the limitations of the historical socialist movements, which remain conditioned by the ideologies from which they originated. Distinctions must be made to guide concrete choices between the various levels of expression of socialism: a generous aspiration and a seeking for more just society, historical movements with a political organization and aim, and ideology which claims to give a complete and self-sufficient picture of man. Nevertheless, these distinctions must not lead one to consider such level as completely separate and independent. The concrete link which, according to circumstances, exists between them must be clearly marked out. This insight will enable Christians to see the degree of commitment possible along these lines, while safeguarding the values, especially those of liberty, responsibility, and openness to spiritual, which guarantees the integral development of man.
Number 33. Marxism remains essentially the active practice of class struggle, experiencing the ever-present and continually renewed force of the relationships of domination and exploitation among men reduce Marxism to no more than a struggle, at times with no other purpose, to be pursued and even stirred up in permanent fashion for others. It is first and foremost the collective exercise of political and economic power under the direction of a single party, which would be the sole expression and guarantee of the welfare of all, and would deprive individuals and other groups of any possibility of initiative and choice. At the third level, Marxism, whether in the power or not, is viewed as a socialist ideology based on the historical materialism and a denial of everything transcendent. At other times, finally, it presents itself in a more attenuated form, one also more attractive to the modern mind as a scientific activity, as a rigorous method of examining social and political reality as the rational link, tested by the history between theoretical knowledge and practice of revolutionary transformation. Although this type of analysis gives a privileged position to certain aspects of reality to the determinant of the test, and interprets them in the light of the ideology, it nevertheless furnishes some people not only working tool but also certitude preliminary to action. The claim to decipher in a scientific manner the mainsprings of the evolution of society. Number 34. While, through the concrete existing form of Marxism, one can distinguish these various aspects and the questions they pose for reflections and activity of Christians, it will be illusory and dangerous to reach a point of forgetting the intimate link which radically binds them together, to accept the elements of Marxist analysis without recognizing the relationships with ideology, and to enter into the practice of class struggles and its Marxist interpretations, while failing to note the kind of totalitarian and violent society to which this process leads. The liberal ideology. 35. On the other side, we are witnesses a renewal of the liberal ideology. This current asserts itself both in the name of economic efficiency and for the defense of the individual against the increasingly overwhelming hold of organizations as a creations against the totalitarian tendencies of political powers. Certainly, personal initiative must be maintained and developed, but do not Christians who take this path tend to idealize liberalism, in their turn making a proclamation in favor of freedom. They would like Hume a model, more adapted to present-day conditions, while easily forgetting that at the very root of philosophical liberalism, in an earnest affirmation of the autonomy of the individual in his activity, his motivation in the exercise is liberty. Hence, the liberal ideology likewise calls for careful discernment on their part. Christian discernment. 36. In this renewed encounter of the various ideologies, the Christian will draw from the sources of his faith and the Church's teaching the necessary principles and suitable criteria to avoid permitting himself to be at first attracted by then imprisoned within a system whose limitations and totalitarianism may well become evident him too late, if he does not perceive him in their roots. Going beyond every system, without however failing to commit himself coherently to serving his brothers. He will assert, in the very midst of his options, the specific character of the Christian contributions for a positive transformation of society.
Rebirth of Utopias. Today, moreover, the weakness of the ideologies are better than perceived through the concrete systems, which they are trying to affirm themselves. Bureaucratic socialisms, technocratic capitalisms, and totalitarian democracy are showing how difficult it is to solve the great human problem of living together in justice and equality. How in the fact could they escape the materialism, egoism, or constraint which inevitably go with them? This is the source of a protest which is springing up more or less everywhere, as a sign of a deep-seated sickness, while at the time we were witnessing the rebirth of what is agreed to call utopias. This claim to resolve the political problem of modern societies better than the ideologies. It would be dangerous to disregard this. The appeal of utopia is often a convenient excuse for those who wish to escape from the concrete task in order to take refuge in the imaginary world. To live in a hypothetical future is a facile alibi for rejecting immediate responsibilities, but it must clearly be recognized that it is a kind of criticism of existing society often provokes the forward-looking imagination both to perceive in the present the disregarded possibility hidden within it, and to direct itself toward the fresh future. It thus sustains social dynamism by the confidence that it gives to the inventive powers of the human mind and heart, and it refuses no overture. It can also meet Christian appeal. The Spirit of the Lord, who animates man renewed in Christ, continually breaks down the horizons within which his understanding likes to find security, and the limits to which his activity would willingly restrict himself. Here dwells within him the power which urges him to go beyond every system and every ideology. At the heart of the world there dwells the mystery of a man discovering himself to be God's Son. In the course of the historical and psychological process in which constraint and freedom, as well as weight of the sin and the breadth of the spirit, alternate and struggle for the upper hand. Dynamism of the Christian faith here triumphs over narrow calculation of egoism. animated by the power of Spirit of Jesus Christ, the Savior of mankind, and upheld by hope, the Christian involves himself in the building up of the human city, one that is to be peaceful, just to fraternal and acceptable as an offering to God. In fact, the expectation of a new world must not be weakened but rather stimulate concern for the cultivating this one, for here grows the body of the new human family, a body which even now is able to give some kind of foreshadowing of the new age. The questioning of the human sciences. 38. In this world, dominated by scientific and theological change, which threatens to drag it towards the new positivism, another more fundamental doubt is raised, having subdued nature by using his reasons. Man now finds that he himself, as is at it, were imprisoned within his rationality. He becomes the objective of science. The human sciences are today enjoying a significant flowering. On the one hand, they are subjecting to critical and radical examination the hitherto accept knowledge about a man on the grounds that kind of this knowledge seems either too empirical or too theoretical. On the other hand, methodological necessity and ideological presuppositions too often lead the human science to isolate in various situations certain aspects of man, and yet to give this an explanation which claims to be complete, or distant interpretations which is meant to be all-embracing, from purely quantitative or phenomenological point of view. This scientific reduction betrays a dangerous preposition to give privileged positions in this way to such an aspect of analysis, to mutilate man, and under the pretext of a scientific procedure to make it impossible to understand man in his totality. Number 39. One must be no less attentive to the action which the human sciences can investigate, giving rise to the elaboration of models of society to be subsequently imposed on the men as scientifically tested types of behavior. Man can then become the object of the manipulations directing his desires and need to, and modifying his behavior, and then his systems of values. There's no doubt that there exists here grave danger for societies of tomorrow, and for man himself, for even if all agree to build a society at the service of men, it is still essential to know what sort of man is in question. Widening the horizons. 40. Suspicion of the human sciences affects the Christian more than others, but it does not find him disarmed, for as we ourselves wrote the Popularum Progresso, it is here that there found the specific contribution of the Church to civilizations, sharing the noblest aspirations of men and suffering when he sees them not satisfied. She wishes to help them attain their full flowering, and that's why she offers men what she possesses as her characteristics attribute, a global vision of man and the human race. So the Church, in its turn, contests the proceeding of human sciences and condemn their pretensions, as in the case of the natural sciences. The Church has confidence in this research also and urges Christians to play an active part in it. Prompted by the same scientific demands and the desire to know man better, but at the same time enlightened by their faith, Christians who devote themselves to the human sciences will begin in dialogue between the Church. This is new field of discovery, a dialogue which promises to be fruitful. Of course, individual sciences discipline will able in its own particular sphere to grasp only a promises to be fruit only a partial yet true aspect of man. The complete picture and full meaning will escape it, but within these limits, the human sciences give promise of a positive function that these churches willingly recognize. They can even widen the horizons of human liberty to a greater extent than the conditioning circumstances perceived, enable one to foresee. They could thus assist Christian social morality, which no doubt will see its field restricted when it comes to suggesting certain models of society, while its function of making a critical judgment and taking an overall view will be strengthened by its own showing the relative characters of the behavior and values presented by such as a society as definitive and inherent in the very nature of man. This science are conditioned at once indispensable and inadequate for better discovery of what is human. They are language which becomes more and more complex, yet one that depends rather than solve the mystery of a human heart, nor does it provide the complete and definitive answer to the desire which springs from his innermost being.
This better knowledge of a man make it possible to pass a better critical judgment upon an elucidate and fundamental notion that remain at the basis of modern society as their motives, their measure and their goal, namely progress since the 19th century. Western societies, and as a result, may other have put their hopes in seasonally renewed and indefined progress. They saw this progress as a man's effort to free himself in face of the demands of nature and social constraint. Progress was the condition for and the yardstick of human freedom. Progress, spread by the modern media of information and by demands of wider knowledge and greater consumption, had become an omnipresent ideology, yet a doubt arises today regarding both its values and result. What is the meaning of the never-ending, breathless pursuit of progress that always eludes one just when one believes one has conquered it sufficiently in order to enjoy it in peace? If it's not attained, it leaves one dissatisfied. Without doubt, there had been just condemnation of the layman and even the mislead of a merely quantitative economic growth. There is a desire to attain objectives of a qualitative order. Also, the quality and the truth of human relation, the degree of participation and responsibility are no less significant and important of the future of society than this quantity and variety of the goods produced in consumption. overcoming the temptation to wish to measure everything in terms of efficiency and of trade, and in terms of interplay of force and interest. Man today wish to replace this quantitative criteria with the intensity of communication, the spread of knowledge and culture, mutual service and combining of effort of common tasks. Is not genuine progress to found in the development of moral consciousness, which will lead man to exercise a wider solidarity and to open himself freely to others and to God. For a Christian, progress necessarily comes up against the eschatological mystery of death, the death of Christ and resurrection, and the outpouring of the Spirit of the Lord helps man to place his freedom in creativity and gratitude within the context of the truth of all progress and the hope, only hope, which doesn't not deceive. In the face of so many new questions, the Church make an effort to reflect in order to give an answer in its own sphere to man's expectation. If today the problems seem original in their breadth and their urgency, is man without the means of solving them? It is with all the dynamism that the social teaching of the Church accompany men in their search. If does not intervene to authenticate a given structure or to our purpose a ready-made model, is not thereby limit itself to recalling general principle. It developed through reflection applied to the changing situation of this world, under the driving force of the gospel, as the source of innu that when its message is accepted in its totality and with all its demands. It's also developed with the sensitive proper to the church which is characterized by disinterest with to serve by attention it the poorest. Finally, it's drawn upon its rich experience of many centuries which enable it, while continuing its permanent preoccupation, to undertake the daring and creative innovation which the present state of the world require. There is a need to establish a greater justice in the sharing of goods, both within national communication and on the international level. In international exchange, there is a need to go beyond relationship based on force, in order to arrive at agreement reached with the goods of all men. Relationship based on force had never in fact established justice in a true and lasting manner. Even it's at certain time, the alteration of position can often make it possible to find easier conditions of dialogues. The use of force, moreover, lead to the settings in notion opposing force, and from this spring a climate of struggle which open the way to situation of extreme violence and to abuse. But as we have often stated, the most important duty in the realm of justice is to allow each country to promote its own development within the framework of a cooperation free for any spirit of domination within economic or political. The complexity of the problem raised an uncertain grade in the present intertwining of mutual dependency. Thus it is necessary to have the courage to undertake a revision of the relation within nations. Whenever it is a question of international division of production, the structure of exchange, the control of profit, the monetary system, without forgetting the action of human solidarity, to question the model of growth of the rich nation and change people's outlook, so that they may realize the priority call of international duty and to renew international organization so that they may increase in efficientness. Under the driving force of a new system of production, national frontiers are breaking down and we can see the new economic power emerging. The multinational enterprise which by the concentration and flexibility of their means can conduct autonomous strategy which are largely independent of the national political power, and therefore not subject to control from the point of view of the common good. By extending their activities, This private organization can lead to a new and abusive form of economic domination on the social, cultural, and even political level. The exclusive concentration of means and power that Pope Pius XI already condemned on the 40th anniversary of Rerum Novarum is taken on a new and very real image.
Change of attitudes and structures. 45. Today, many yearn to free themselves from need and dependence, but this liberation starts with the interior freedom that men must find again with regard to their goods and their powers. They will never reach it except through a transcendent love for man and, in consequence, through a genuine readiness to serve. Otherwise, as one can only see too clearly, the most revolutionary ideologies lead only to a change of masters. Once installed in their power in their turn, these new masters surround themselves with privileges, limit freedom, and allow other forms of injustice to become established. Thus, many people are reaching the point of questioning the very model of society. The ambition of many nations, and the competition that sets them in opposition and which carries them along, is to attain technological, economic, and military power. This ambition then stands in the way of setting up structures in which the rhythm of progress would be regulated with a view to greater justice, instead of accentuating inequalities and living in a climate of distrust and struggle, which would unceasingly compromise peace. Christian meaning of political activity. Is it not here that there appears a radical limitation to economics? Economic activity is necessary and, if it is at the service of man, it can be a source of brotherhood and a sign of providence. It is the occasion of concrete exchanges between man, of rights recognized, of services rendered, and of dignity affirmed in work. Though it is often a field of confrontation and domination, it can give rise to dialogue and foster cooperation. Yet, it runs the risk of taking up too much strength and freedom. This is why the need is felt to pass from economics to politics. It is true that in the term politics, many confusions are possible and must be clarified, but each man feels that, in the social and economic field, both national and international, the ultimate decision rests with political power. Political power, which is the natural and necessary link for ensuring the cohesion of the social body, must have as its aim the achievement of the common good, while respecting the legitimate liberties of individuals, families, and subsidiary groups. It acts in such a way as to create, effectively and for the well-being of all, the conditions required for attaining man's true and complete good, including his spiritual end. It acts within the limit of its competence, which can vary from people to people and from country to country. It always intervenes with care for justice and with devotion to the common good, for which it holds final responsibility. It does not, for all that, deprive individuals and intermediary bodies of the field of activity and responsibility which are proper to them, and which lead them to collaborate in the attainment of this common good. In fact, the true aim of all social activity should be to help individual members of the social body, but never to destroy or absorb them. According to the vocation proper to is, the political power must know how to stand aside from particular interests in order to view its responsibility with regard to the good of all men, even going beyond national limits. To take politics seriously at its different levels, local, regional, national, and worldwide, is to affirm the duty of man, of every man, to recognize the concrete reality and the value of the freedom of choice that is offered to him to seek to bring about the good of the city and of the nation and of mankind. Politics are a demanding matter, but not the only one, of living the Christian commitment to the service of others. Without, of course, solving every problem, it endeavors to apply solutions to the relationships men have with one another. The domain of politics is wide and comprehensive, but it is not exclusive. An attitude of enroachment which would tend to set up politics as an absolute value would bring serious danger. While recognizing the autonomy of the reality of politics, Christians who are invited to take up political activity should try to make their choices consistent with the gospel and, in the framework of a legitimate plurality, to give both personal and collective witness to the seriousness of their faith by effective and disinterested service of men. Sharing in responsibility. 47. The passing to the political dimension also expresses a demand made by the man of today, a greater sharing in responsibility and in decision-making. This legitimate aspiration becomes more evident as the cultural level rises, as the sense of freedom develops, and as man becomes more aware of how, in a world facing an uncertain future, the choices of today already condition the life of tomorrow. In Mater et Magistra, Pope John XXIII stressed how much the admittance to responsibility is a basic demand of man's nature, a concrete exercise of his freedom, and a path to his development. And he showed how, in economic life, and particularly in enterprise, this sharing in responsibilities should be ensured. Today, the field is wider and extends to the social and political sphere in which a reasonable sharing in responsibility and in decisions must be established and strengthened. Admittedly, it is true that the choices proposed for a decision are more and more complex. The considerations that must be borne in mind are numerous, and foreseeing of the consequences involves risk, even if new sciences strive to enlighten freedom at these important moments. However, although limits are sometimes called for, these obstacles must not slow down the giving of wider participation in working out decisions, making choices and putting them into practice. In order to counterbalance increasing technocracy, modern forms of democracy must be devised, not only making it possible for each man to become informed and to express himself, but also by involving him in a shared responsibility. Thus, human groups will gradually begin to share and to live as communities. Thus, freedom, which too often asserts itself as a claim for autonomy by opposing the freedom of others, will develop in its deepest human reality to involve itself and to spend itself in building up active and lived solidarity. But for the Christian, it is by losing himself in God, who sets him free, that man finds true freedom, renewed in death and the resurrection of the Lord. Call to action. Need to become involved in action. 48. In the social sphere, the Church has always wished to assume a double function. First, to enlighten the minds in order to assist them to discover the truth and to find the right path to follow amid the different teachings that call for their attention. And secondly, to take part in action and to spread, with a real care for service and effectiveness, the energies of the gospel. Is it not in order to be faithful to this desire that the Church has sent on an apostolic mission among the workers' priests who, by sharing fully the condition of the worker, are at that level the witnesses to the Church's solicitude and seeking? It is to all Christians that we address a fresh and insistent call to action. In our encyclical on the development of peoples, we urge that all should set themselves to the task. Laymen should take up as their own proper task the renewal of the temporal order. If the role of the hierarchy is to teach and to interpret authentically the norms of morality to be followed in this matter, it belongs to the laity, without waiting passively for orders and directives, to take the initiatives freely and to infuse the Christian spirit into the mentality, customs, laws, and structures of the community in which they live. Let each one examine himself to see what he has done up to now and what he ought to do. It is not enough to recall principles, state intentions, point to crying injustice, and other prophetic denunciations. These words will lack real weight unless they are accompanied for each individual by a livelier awareness of personal responsibility and by effective action. It is too easy to throw back on others responsibility for injustice if at the same time one does not realize how each one shares in it personally and how personal convention is needed first. This basic humility will rid of action of all inflexibility and sectarianism. It will also avoid discouragement in the face of a task which seems limitless in size. The Christian's hope comes primarily from the fact that he knows that the Lord is working with us in the world, continuing in his body, which is the Church, and through the Church, and the whole of mankind, the redemption was accomplished on the cross, and which burst forth in victory on the morning of the resurrection. This hope springs also from the fact that the Christian knows that other men are at work to undertake actions of justice and peace, working for the same ends. For beneath an outward appearance of indifference, in the heart of every man, there is a will to live in brotherhood and a thirst for justice and peace, which is to be expanded.
Each one to determine. Thus, amid the diversity of situations, functions, and organizations, each one must determine in his conscience the actions which he is called to share in, surrounded by various currents into which, besides legitimate aspirations, there insinuate themselves more ambiguous tendencies. The Christian must take a wise and vigilant choice and avoid involving himself in collaboration without conditions and contrary to the principles of a true humanism, even in the name of a genuinely left solidarity. If in fact he wishes to play a specific part as a Christian in accordance with his faith, a part that unbelievers themselves expect of him, he must take care in the midst of his active commitment to clarify his motives and to rise above the objectives aimed at by taking a more all-embracing view which will avoid the danger of self-particularism and oppressive totalitarianism. Pluralism of options. In concrete situations and taking account of solidarity in each person's life, one must recognize a legitimate variety of possible options. The same Christian faith can lead to different commitments. The Church invites all Christians to take up a double task of inspiring and of innovating, in order to make the structures evolve so as to adapt them to the real needs of today. From Christians who at first sight seem to be in opposition, as a result of starting from different options, she asks an effort at mutual understanding of the other's position and motives. A loyal examination of one's behavior and its correctness will suggest to each one an attitude of more profound charity which, while recognizing the differences, believes nonetheless in the possibility of convergence and unity. The bonds which unite the faithful are mightier than anything which divides them. It is true that people, in the midst of modern structures and conditioning circumstances, are determined by their habits of thought and their functions. Even apart from the safeguarding of material interests, others feel so deeply the solidarity of classes and cultures that they reach the point of sharing without reserve all the judgments and options of their surroundings. Each one will take great care to examine himself and to bring about the true freedom according to Christ, which makes one receptive to the universal in the very midst of the most particular conditions. Awakening the people of God. It is in this regard, too, that Christian organizations, under their different forms, have a responsibility for collective action. Without putting themselves in the place of the institutions of civil society, they have to express, in their own way and rising above their particular nature, the concrete demands of the Christian faith for a just and consequently necessary transformation of society. Today, more than ever, the Word of God will be unable to be proclaimed and heard unless it is accompanied by the witness of the power of the Holy Spirit, working within the action of Christians in the service of their brothers, at the point in which their existence and their future are at stake. In expressing these reflections to you, venerable brother, we are of course aware that we have not dealt with all the social problems that today face the man of faith and men of goodwill. Our recent declarations, to which has been added your message of a short time ago on the occasion of the launching of the second development decade, particularly concerning the duties of the community of nations in the serious question of the integral and concerted development of man, are still fresh in people's minds. We address these present reflections to you with the aim of offering to the Council of the Laity and the Pontifical Commission Justice and Peace some fresh contributions, as well as an encouragement for the pursuit of their task of awakening the people of the God to a full understanding of its role at the present time, and of promoting the apostolate on the international level. It is with these sentiments, venerable brother, that we impart to you our apostolic blessing.